Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, we have been studying the Ānāpānasati Sutta, number 118 in the middle-length discourses of the Buddha. And before we go further, I just refer back to paragraph number 15 in the Sutta, which is, you say, the key to the development of the sutta. Here the Buddha says that when mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated, it is of great fruit and great benefit. When mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated, it fulfills the 4 foundations of mindfulness. When the 4 foundations of mindfulness are developed and cultivated, they fulfill the 7 enlightenment factors. When the 7 enlightenment factors are developed and cultivated, they fulfill true knowledge and deliverance. Okay, last week I explained the sentence how when mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated, it fulfills the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Now we saw that this is done in that the 16 aspects of mindfulness of breathing fall into 4 groups. We call them the 4 tetrads, 4 sets of 4. And these 4 tetrads are correlated with the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So the first tetrad belongs to contemplation of the body, mindfulness of the body. The second tetrad belongs to contemplation of feeling. Third tetrad belongs to contemplation of mind. And the fourth tetrad belongs to Dhammanupassana, contemplation of phenomena. Okay, now we come to the sentence, when the 4 foundations of mindfulness are developed and cultivated, they fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment. And this theme, the theme that's announced by this sentence, is developed starting in paragraph 29 of the sutta, on page 946. So the Buddha says, and how, monks, do the 4 foundations of mindfulness developed and cultivated fulfill these 7 enlightenment factors? And here, of course, it's important to pay attention to these words, developed and cultivated. So it's not that when one just begins to practice any of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, that the 7 factors of enlightenment are immediately being fulfilled. But it is when these 4 foundations of mindfulness reach a level of maturity that they bring to fulfillment the 7 enlightenment factors. But we could say that already the factors that are going to constitute the enlightenment factors are already starting to be initiated or instigated or activated from the very moment that one is starting to practice the four foundations of mindfulness. Okay, so we come in paragraph 30. On whatever occasion a bhikkhu abides contemplating the body as a body, ardent, fully aware or clearly comprehending and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief, or better, now I like longing and dejection for the world, on that occasion, unremitting mindfulness is established in him. And here the expression, the Pali word is sati asamutta. It means the mindfulness which is not confused, mindfulness which is not blurry, indistinct, vague, mindfulness which is not obscure. So on whatever occasion unremitting mindfulness is established in a bhikkhu, on that occasion the mindfulness enlightenment factor is aroused in him, and he develops it, and by development it comes to fulfillment in him. And here it's interesting to look at the Pali word here. We have, on whatever occasion unremitting mindfulness is established in the monk. On whatever occasion upattita sati, which this shows as the key to the meaning of satipatthana. One key. Upattita. I'll write also another word, asamutta. This word upattita is related to the noun upatana. And that shows that satipatthana is almost certainly a combination of sati plus upatthana. Which means establishing of mindfulness, setting up of mindfulness. So satipatthana would be the establishing of mindfulness rather than foundation of mindfulness. But foundation of mindfulness sounds good and it's caught on, so and so the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused when one is contemplating the body in the body on any occasion, ardent, that's with energy, clearly comprehending, we're fully aware. In this case, clearly comprehending the object, keeping the object clearly under the beam of observation, and mindful. And even from that initial moment, one would say the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused in one. It's being instigated, initiated. But that is not yet sufficient. There are actually 3 stages indicated here, 3 stages in the evolution of the enlightenment factor. First, one arouses the enlightenment factor. Then after arousing it, then one has to work on it continuously, consistently, continuously. Diligently work on developing that enlightenment factor. And then through development, by cultivating the enlightenment factor, then it comes to fulfillment, to completion. Okay, in this case, since this is mindfulness of breathing, and this is contemplating the body as a body based on mindfulness of breathing. So the object of body observation would be the breath coming under one of the 4 tetrads connected with mindfulness of breathing. One could presume that. Okay, in paragraph 31 now, we move from the enlightenment factor of mindfulness into the second enlightenment factor, which is called the enlightenment factor of, how do we translate it here, investigation of states, Dhamma Vichaya Sambojjhanga. A rather difficult term to translate exactly. Okay, so the text says, abiding thus mindful, he investigates and examines that state with wisdom and embarks upon a full inquiry into it. Then on whatever occasion, abiding thus mindful, a bhikkhu investigates and examines that state with wisdom and embarks upon a full inquiry into it. On that occasion, the investigation of states or investigation of phenomena, enlightenment factor is aroused in him, and he develops it, and by development it comes to fulfillment in him. It's a little hard to understand why the text uses that singular expression, that state. So there's an interesting parallel passage on the Enlightenment Factors. Comes in the Samyutta Nikaya, actually the Bojjhanga Samyutta, the collection on the Enlightenment Factors, where it speaks about a monk having heard the Dhamma from elder monks. Then after he has heard the Dhamma from the elder monks, he remembers that Dhamma, and here remembering it is the sati sambojjhanga, because sati, the word sati, also has the meaning of memory. So one remembers or bears that teaching that one has heard in mind, then one investigates and examines that. Here the word, that state is that Dhamma, tang Dhamma. One investigates that Dhamma with wisdom, and there the singular would be quite appropriate, because here it's just referring to the teaching that one has heard from others. But in this situation, as one is abiding mindful of or contemplating the body as a body while breathing mindfully in and out, many Dhammas are occurring. So why use the singular? It seems almost as though a passage appropriate for one situation has been sort of imported into this context. And there are other passages on the enlightenment factor of investigation of phenomena which use the plural, where one investigates phenomena to determine what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what is bright, what is dark, what is good, what is bad. And there the plural would be appropriate. But anyway, let us take the case that as one is settling in mindfully on the body, observing the body in the course of in and out breathing, now one is examining bodily phenomena with wisdom. The dhammas that constitute the body. It could be the in and out breathing itself, or various bodily phenomena occurring in connection with the in and out breath. So in this case, one could say one is now examining these dhammas with wisdom. Examining them to determine their nature, investigating the experience, maybe dissecting it in terms of the 5 aggregates, or simply observing the changing experiences and observing them in terms of impermanence, or in terms of rising and falling of phenomena. Okay, and so this is now, we call it the initial phase in the development of panya, of wisdom. It's not yet the really mature wisdom, but actually this enlightenment factor of wisdom, or the enlightenment factor of investigation of states, though it emerges, it's said to emerge right after the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, but one shouldn't think that this factor of investigation of states just comes second, then once it gives rise to the next factor, energy, that it somehow subsides and vanishes, and that there's no further wisdom in the rest of the process. But rather, once this investigative quality emerges, it will continue to remain present through the remaining stages, even though I think at some of these stages it will again subside and remain dormant, and then come again into dominance later. In fact, I prefer to see the function of wisdom as following upon the enlightenment factor of mindfulness to be simply observing the states of mind that arise and being able to discriminate and determine amongst them which are wholesome, which are unwholesome, in order to remove, to check the unwholesome states and to encourage and strengthen the wholesome states. Because we still have to further the process, increase the process of concentration before there's a strong enough base for the really penetrative wisdom to operate. And we haven't yet reached that point yet. So it's actually expressed as though energy emerges from wisdom. Do you have any thoughts about that, Venerable Analayo? Okay, so this investigation of phenomena enlightenment factor again goes through this, every factor will go through these same three stages. The factor is aroused, awakened, instigated, then one develops it, and then as it is developed, eventually it reaches the peak of development, the culmination, it comes to fulfillment. Okay, now, as one investigates and examines that state with wisdom and embarks upon a full inquiry into it, sounds almost like there's a Senate investigating committee going. Tireless energy is aroused. And here it seems that it's this work of investigation, examination that spurs an increase in the interest, stirs up interest, and that as that interest increases, it brings a boost in the energy. So now of course, to start the practice, one needs energy and effort, but it is when the effort starts to bear fruit and one is able to investigate, see into starting to see into the nature of the mind, the nature of phenomena, to see more and more clearly, that energy starts to gain a momentum of its own and builds up this force until it becomes, as described here, tireless, a force that can almost continue on its own, almost without, it seems almost effortlessly. And so at this point it is said the energy enlightenment factor is aroused in him. And he develops it, and by development it comes to fulfillment in him. Okay, now when this energy becomes very strong, this spontaneous arising of energy, this almost electrifying, vibrant energy, then it brings along, it generates, it spontaneously arouses what is called unworldly, or you might call it non-carnal, non-sensual rapture or joy. Here the Pali expression is niramisa piti. I think I explained last week or 2 weeks ago that joy can sometimes be sensual bound up with worldly enjoyment, but it can also be niramisa, which means free from sensual entanglements. And that this is the kind of joy that arises through meditative contemplation. This is the joy or rapture free from all tinges of worldliness. And when it arises, it's felt as though it's sometimes flooding the body, sweeping through the mind. Sometimes the body feels so light as though it's floating. Sometimes as though it's streaming down a river. Sometimes as though currents of electrical vibrations are going through the body. Sometimes when this comes, one wants to stand up and start shouting with joy. But those are just early stages of this rapture, sort of defiled forms of this rapture. And so from the initial stages where this enlightenment factor of rapture is aroused, one has to develop it, and then by development it comes to fulfillment in him. But rapture itself, especially or at least in the initial stages, has this kind of quality of excitement, exhilaration, and and lack of control in it. Almost an aspect of agitation, or can easily spill over into agitation. And so if one is not careful when this rapture and joy arise, then one can lose the meditative frame of mind and become the victim of delusions, sometimes delusions of grandeur. One will think that one is gaining divine revelations. Maybe one is the chosen one of God. One will just become addicted to this joy and rapture. But one who has the guidelines of the Dhamma will know that one has to bring that rapture to a state of refinement, a state of quiescence. And as one does so, gradually the body and the mind become tranquil. This brings the emergence of the enlightenment factor of tranquility. So the text says, paragraph 34, in one who is rapturous, actually it's more literally, for one whose mind is full of joy, full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil and the mind becomes tranquil. And on whatever occasion, for a bhikkhu whose mind is full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil and the mind becomes tranquil. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of tranquility is aroused in him, and he develops it, and by development it comes to fulfillment in him. Okay, so rapture gradually gets quieted down or subsides, gets refined, and it gives rise to this enlightenment factor of tranquility, which is felt, experienced both in the body and in the mind. And now, in paragraph 35, we have something interesting. in one whose body is tranquil and who feels pleasure, the mind becomes concentrated. Pasada kayasa sukino chitang samadhiyati. Now here, one quality is mentioned which is not an enlightenment factor in itself, but is almost spliced in between two enlightenment factors, and that is pleasure or happiness, sukha. So we have one whose body is tranquil, but actually it's not only the body that is tranquil, but the mind is tranquil. Both the body is tranquil, the mind is tranquil. And then as a result of that tranquility of body, tranquility of mind, one experiences pleasure or happiness, the pleasant feeling. That tranquilization of the body, the tranquilization of the mind, brings along a pleasant feeling. The pleasant feeling is different from that experience of rapture, that uplifting, exciting, joyous experience. This is a very calm, quiet, but delightful feeling of pleasure. And it is through that feeling of pleasure that the mind can just quietly settle down and rest undisturbed upon its object. And so it becomes concentrated. And so, on this occasion, when the mind becomes concentrated, on this occasion when the body is tranquil and one is feeling pleasure, and the mind becomes concentrated, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of concentration is aroused in him. And then he develops that enlightenment factor of concentration. And then by development it comes to fulfillment in him. The same three stages. Okay, then once the mind becomes concentrated, then the meditator doesn't have to do any more work in order to gain concentration. So he's able simply to look on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. The text says, so tata samahitang chittang sadhukang ajupekita hoti. He is one who looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. So this expression, he is one who looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated, points to the emergence of the enlightenment factor of equanimity. And again, that enlightenment factor of equanimity goes through the same three stages. And so what is taking place here in the emergence, you could say the gradual emergence of the enlightenment factors, we could say is a progressive process of quieting down of the mind, culminating in equanimity. would say that the working factors in the development, or the working forces in the development of the 7 enlightenment factors are factors number 1, 2, and 3. 1 is mindful of the object. 1 investigates and examines whatever states are arising. And 1 applies energy and effort. As 1 is applying these 3 factors, naturally they will give rise to rapture. Now, if 1 doesn't have sufficient mindfulness, the rapture can become a force which develops its own vector, you could say, which goes off on a tangent and pulls 1 off from the straight course of meditative progress. But mindfulness serves as a check, a controlling influence on rapture. It doesn't allow rapture to become carried away. And so when rapture wants to pull the mind away like a wild horse, mindfulness says, whoa, go quietly and gently. As it does so, then just naturally tranquility sets in. And from tranquility there comes concentration, and from concentration equanimity.
The way this reads to me,
yeah.
It seems that up until equanimity, they all flow one from the next.
Yeah.
But the way the language is on equanimity,
yeah.
It's almost as if there's a different movement of the mind there, or of experience, to bring equanimity to bear on the concentration.
And so it takes...
Because every other paragraph begins with, in one who is rapturous, or, in one who is, then this.
Yeah.
And that one, all of a sudden, he closely looks on with equanimity.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Actually, mirrors paragraph 31 where he investigates and examines. It's more of an active statement.
Because I know from my own experience, my own practice, there are times when I just keep striving for that concentration, and I don't bring, I don't bring that equanimity to the concentration, and the concentration just becomes an end, an end into itself. You just get fixated on the concentration. So it seems that the way it's written, that there's some sort of trigger to say, okay, here's the concentration, now I have to be equanimous, with it.
Yeah, so I would say equanimity to some extent has to be present, at least in incipient form, almost from the beginning, but it doesn't really emerge fully till one reaches that end point.
Putting aside covetousness and grief is a form of equanimity, isn't it?
It implies a movement in the direction of equanimity, I would say. Does that go Nalaya? Do you have? Yeah. But it's often struck me as a bit peculiar in the Enlightenment Factors. So I know there's an explanation. But one would think Enlightenment Factors would culminate in Panya, in wisdom, as a factor that would be, the high point, the climax, the factor that leads most directly to enlightenment. But here we have the factor that represents panya, investigation of states, coming in second place, and the way it's presented here, not playing a very prominent role in an enlightenment experience. Yeah. So there's another sutta, I think it is it the Nanda-Govada Sutta? No, it doesn't have the statement that I want. I think it might have been from the Milinda Punha, which gives a statement that gives the primary role to the investigation of states enlightenment factor, and it's Milinda Punha, and sees the other 6 enlightenment factors as supporting the investigation of states enlightenment factor. Did somebody have their hand up? Haywood?
Yes. I don't understand what equanimity has to do with looking at this factor of concentration. Maybe you aroused concentration, developed it, and brought it to fulfillment. What is there to be equanimous about?
I think what this implies is that up to the point that one reaches concentration, one has to balance certain factors that tend to arouse, factors that are arousing and factors that are quieting. Okay, factors that are arousing would be investigation of states, energy, and rapture. Those are factors that arouse the mind. Okay, tranquility and concentration are factors that quiet the mind. Also, equanimity itself is a quieting factor. But especially tranquility and concentration are factors that quiet the mind. And mindfulness is the supreme balancing factor. And so one has to apply mindfulness to balance the arousing and the quieting factors until one achieves concentration, samadhi. Then once concentration is achieved, then one realizes that nothing further has to be done by way of either arousing, activating the energetic forces, or by activating the quieting forces. And so now one just, in a sense, stands back and sees that the mind is concentrated. That's the way I would understand this.
Just understanding that the mind is concentrated, you say that's what constitutes equanimity?
I wouldn't say that exhausts the role of equanimity. By no means. It's just a very, very limited aspect of equanimity. But that's just the way I would understand this sentence at the beginning of 36. He closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. That's the way I would understand the way that sentence fits into this pattern here. But there are many different aspects to upekkha, equanimity. I think good luck in the index just to see the way it occurs in the Majjhima Nikaya. There are various kinds of equanimity. Yeah, there are quite a number of references to different types of equanimity in the index of subjects on page 1393. Okay, I wanted to go on. I wanted to finish the sutta today. Okay, so now we complete the development of the enlightenment factors based on contemplating the body as a body through mindfulness of breathing. But now, if you remember, the practice or the development of mindfulness of breathing falls into the 16 aspects within the 4 tetrads. And so one is developing this mindfulness of breathing in any of the 4 modes. So this is the 4 contemplations, the 4 types of mindfulness. And so one can be developing mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of the mind, or mindfulness of phenomena. Any of those can serve as the starting point for this whole sequence in the development of the 7 enlightenment factors. And so paragraph 37 develops a whole sequence based on contemplation of feelings. Paragraph 38 develops the whole sequence based upon contemplating mind as mind. Paragraph 39 develops the whole sequence based upon contemplating phenomena as phenomena. And then we come to the conclusion of this section. That is how the 4 foundations of mindfulness, developed and cultivated, fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment. And then we come to the last major section of the sutta. How do the 7 enlightenment factors, developed and cultivated, again that's the important phrase, fulfill true knowledge and deliverance? True knowledge, vijja, will mean especially the full, clear, perfect knowledge of the 4 noble truths. And deliverance, the liberation, is the liberation of the mind from the asavas, the taints of craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, and beginningless ignorance. And how is this done? Here, a monk develops the mindfulness enlightenment factor, which is supported by seclusion, dispassion and cessation, and ripens in relinquishment or giving up. Here we have this, it's a stock description of sometimes the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, sometimes the 7 factors of enlightenment. Each of them is said to be viveka nisitang, supported by seclusion, viraga nisitang, nirodha nisitang, vosaga parinami. The commentaries give a very technical explanation of this, so we don't have to go into that. But I think it's enough just to take this as basic term suggesting the sort of flavor and aim of the development of the enlightenment factors. In fact, all of these terms, viveka, viraga, nirodha, they're used as synonyms for nibbana. So one might take it in the sense that the enlightenment factors are developed, supported by these qualities in the sense that one is aiming at nibbana through their practice. And also this word vosaga, meaning relinquishment or giving up, also seems to suggest that kind of letting go or giving up that culminates in the attainment of nibbana. And so the enlightenment factors are evolving on to that complete letting go of all attachments. And so when the enlightenment factors are developed in that way, then they will fulfill, or in other words, they will culminate in that true knowledge, that liberating knowledge of the full, exact, profound knowledge of the Four Noble Truths, and the liberation of the mind from all defilements, all the taints. And with that, the Buddha brought the discourse to an end. Okay, now if there's any questions, comments.
Could you just tell me what the English is for some of these words? Vipassana.
Yeah. Yeah. The English is in the book. Vivekanisitam means supported by seclusion. Viraganisitam, supported by dispassion. Nirodhanisitam, supported by cessation. And vosaga parinaming, ripening in or evolving towards relinquishment or letting go or giving up.
Do I recall a similar passage elsewhere? And do I recall you saying that relinquishment meant that it was a specific relinquishment? I thought it was more specific than just letting go. I might not be remembering. I might be thinking.
There is this passage does occur elsewhere, and I explained it elsewhere in connection with. I think we met this at the end of the Sabbasava Sutta. That's Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 2. I think what I might have said is that it's more specific just than the general letting go, but it's the letting go that culminates in Nibbana, or that signifies Nibbana, the full letting go of Nibbana.
I don't have any, I just looked at my notes. I don't have anything. So I must be thinking of something else.
I think that's what I might have said. Not just an ordinary letting go, but it's the full letting go of Nirvana.
Some of these suttas we have a little background as to the circumstances that he felt compelled to give the sutta. At the beginning, he lists all these different things one could be meditating on, the body and so on, and he feels that he needs to expound on the worth of mindfulness of breathing, and I wonder if we know why. If it's recorded in the commentaries or something.
The commentary to this sutta didn't give a special reason why the Buddha would have spoken about mindfulness of breathing, about why he would have praised it and elaborated upon it here. I don't recall it giving a special reason for that. Excuse me? Let me just... I know that the Buddha himself had practiced this meditation very often, particularly when he would go into seclusion. And this was, if you remember from the beginning, this was a period at the end of the rains retreat, and many monks were practicing very earnestly and reaching high levels of attainment. And so he might have praised mindfulness of breathing here because he wanted the monks to practice very earnestly and to reach, to sort of bring their training to its culmination. That would be my conjecture. Did you have it?
Well, I just recalled one sutta where he asked the monks to meditate on the motionless of the body.
Yeah.
And then he ended up committing suicide.
Yeah.
And he said monks seem thin, and perhaps if they meditated on breathing.
Yeah. 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 Then not that they're losing weight, it's that the numbers of the monks have diminished, so where have they all gone to? But that was a different situation from this, a different place also. That was in Vaisali, and this is in Savatthi. Any questions? Or?
Would Gautama have continued to practice meditation after his enlightenment?
He certainly did. It's not that he had anything further to accomplish or to fulfill, but it said that he did so for two reasons. One is to set an example for later generations, and the other is for his Dita Dhamma Sukha Vihara, which means for dwelling pleasantly in this very life. If the Buddha doesn't meditate, the other monks will look at him and say, well, he's not doing it, why should we do it? They'll think that if we don't meditate, it means that we are enlightened. Only the ones who are unenlightened have to meditate.
Bhante, in this sutta, the Buddha connects the meditation of breathing in the beginning from samatha to vipassana. Right?
Yeah.
And meditation with the breath as object in samatha exists long before the Buddha, right?
That's an interesting question.
It's his teacher before he gets into ascetic practice taught him the samatha.
There were samatha meditations before the Buddha. Whether any of them used the breath quite the way the Buddha did, based on the existing literature, I don't know if there's any evidence for that. There are, of course, probably types of pranayama practices, but I don't know whether there's anything corresponding to mindfulness of breathing.
Not mindfulness. I think they use it for samatha. So they just...
There would have been types of samatha practice. Whether they were based on the breath, that I don't know. I don't know. I'm not saying that they weren't, but I don't know.
From Brahmajala Sutta, we would think they may have used casino objects, not Ānāpānasati.
Any further questions? Yeah.
I'm wondering about equanimity's connection with the other Brahma Viharas.
Mm-hmm.
They seems to come within.
Okay, the question is, what is the relation of equanimity to the other Brahma Viharas?
In that relationship, and if they will be part of this achievement, to cultivate the seventh enlightenment factor.
Yeah, I think that, you see, the word equanimity is used in different senses or different contexts, and the equanimity that is the fourth Brahma Vihara would be different from the equanimity that is the last of the seven enlightenment factors. Of course, they're both types of equanimity, so they have something in common. It's not an accident that the same word is used for them. So they both have an element of mental balance. But the unifying factor in the Brahma Viharas is that they are states of mind related to living beings, sentient beings. So the Upekkha Brahma Vihara is an equanimity towards sentient beings. Which one might see is an attitude of impartiality, freedom from bias, and also a certain degree of detachment so that one is not shaken by the fortunes of others, the good and bad fortunes of others. But I always have to add to this the qualification that equanimity, the achievement of equanimity, Brahma Vihara, does not exclude the other three Brahma Viharas. It's not that one achieves equanimity, then one becomes cold and indifferent and no longer has loving kindness, compassion, or altruistic joy. They're just different moods of mind. The equanimity developed as the seventh factor of enlightenment is the equanimity, say, is the culminating stage. To put this in the refinement of the mind as an instrument for enlightenment. Making the mind an instrument fit to investigate for discerning and understanding and penetrating the nature of things. And then the important point I wanted to make about the seven enlightenment factors is that equanimity as a seventh doesn't mean that once equanimity is reached, that one just settles down in that equanimity and that is all. Just that from that equanimity one gets enlightenment. But in that equanimity, one has to reinstigate and fortify the factor of investigation of phenomena. And it is that investigation of phenomena that becomes the panya based on samadhi. Now one has the samadhi, the concentration. Concentration has stabilized as equanimity, and it is panya, wisdom, arising out of that equanimity that investigates, examines the nature of things, and that makes the breakthrough that will culminate in enlightenment or true wisdom, the true realization. Okay, I think we'll have to stop for this evening. Let us share the merits. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam akasata chabhumata devanaga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang etavata cha amhe sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavata cha amhe sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavata jamhe sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya.